We're going to get started here in a few minutes. We're going to be in, I'm going to fish it up, Isaiah. We'll be in chapter 9 and verse 13. Isaiah chapter 9 and verse 13. So before we get into verse 13 in chapter 9, there's something I just want to go back and reread. And it is a foreshadowing to what a lot of things that are said, especially in the New Testament when Jesus Christ is talking about. Once I come back and I reestablish my kingdom on earth, a lot of things won't be necessary anymore. So if you look at verse 5 in chapter 9, it says, every warrior's boot used in battle and every garment rolled in blood will be destined for burning, will be fuel for the fire. Like the plow, swords and spears and shields will all be turned into hooks and plowshares, and none of it will be used for battle. There will be no more battle. But after that is what's more interesting. I think I just kind of blew over it, but it's another foreshadowing of the coming of Jesus Christ in verse 6, where it says, For to us a child is born, to us a son is given, and the government will be on his shoulders. So as we know, Jesus Christ, when he starts getting to the end of his ministry, the government, Pontius Pilate, and the Romans start becoming very interested in what he's doing, why he's doing it. The fight between trying to be a middleman between Jesus Christ and Christianity, and the Sadducees and the Pharisees saying, you can't do this, we've got all these laws, and Jesus Christ saying, no, I am the law, and this transition period. So, starting in verse 13, I just want to go over that just to kind of get you warmed up for what the rest of this is. And where we're going with this, especially when we start chapter 10, is God's judgment over Assyria. After Assyria comes in and attempts to take over Judah, how they get punished and why they get punished and how that applies to us today. So, in verse 13, chapter 9, it says, But the people have not returned to him who struck them, nor have they sought the Lord Almighty. So the Lord will cut off from Israel both head and tail, both palm branch and reed in a single day. The elders and dignitaries are the head, the prophets who teach lies are the tail. Those who guide this people misled them, and those who are guided are led astray. Therefore the Lord will take no pleasure in the young men, nor will he pity the fatherless and widows. For everyone is ungodly and wicked, every mouth speaks false. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away, his hand still upraised. That's 3 times that he had said this, that Isaiah said this in 9 chapters. Is that even though God has destroyed, cleared his field, got rid of everybody, his hand is still upraised. He's still waiting for somebody else to step forward so he can smite them. He's just waiting for everything to be cleared out so he can set up Judea, Jerusalem, to be the city-state and the country, for lack of a better term, that he is looking for it to be. He's trying to get rid of all the wickedness. Surely wickedness burns like a fire. It consumes briars and thorns. It sets the forest thickets ablaze, so that it rolls upward in a column of smoke. But the wrath of the Lord Almighty, the land will be scorched, and the people will be fuel for fire. They will not spare one another. On the right they will devour, but still be hungry. On the left they will eat, but not be satisfied. Each will feed on the flesh of their own offspring. Manasseh will feed on Ephraim, and Ephraim on Manasseh. Together they will turn against Judah. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away, his hand still upraised. 4 times now he said it. As I've always believed, if God says something once in the Bible, it's important. If he says it more than once, it's a nail down point. God is going to destroy all the enemies of Judah. God is going to wipe away the vineyard and to clear it out. So stopping in chapter 9 there, any comments to make? Anybody would like to say anything about that portion?
It's kind of interesting that, and it can be maybe read both ways, but in verse 20 there, it says they slice meat on the right and they're still hungry, and they devour on the left but are not satisfied. Each devours the flesh of his own arm.
Is that what it says, their arm?
In the English Standard Version it says, each devours the flesh of his own arm. So, these nations are going to be coming against Jerusalem. And at Jerusalem.
Uh-huh.
And at one point it's so bad that they do resort to cannibalism. Now, whether this is literally what this means here, or if it's just the other nations, or them fighting themselves, the Jews fighting themselves against what God has said, that could be as well. But they did have to resort to that.
I've never read that. That's interesting.
In Jerusalem, especially it's in two different times when Jerusalem was destroyed, especially when the Romans did. Things were so bad that they ran out of food in the city because it was completely cut off.
I always found it interesting when you read about wars, even before Jesus' time, especially after though, up to like 1000 when the first Crusades were taking place during the first millennia. How many people ate dogs and horses and anything that had 4 legs that wasn't you? Now let's eat it.
Yeah.
That to me was shocking to me. I just didn't realize that.
Yeah.
I'm at a 21st century perspective, looking back 1,000 years. I didn't even.
Yeah, in 70 AD it was really bad when the Romans destroyed Jerusalem, or sieged it, I should say,
right,
to destroy it. But yeah, when they were destroyed in the Old Testament days, I'm sure it was like that as well. But yeah, they were.
They didn't have a Smith's around the corner?
No. They were pretty much cut off. And this could, like I said, this could be a symbolistic.
It could be.
In this, eating the flesh of his own arm, or devours the flesh of his own arm. That definitely
There could also be a symbolism there between eating the flesh of the arm and no longer having an arm, which means that you can no longer be a warrior.
Right.
Something.
So, but in both cases, it could go both ways. Because war is horrible. And when the city's cut off and there's nothing to come in, they eat what's there. So.
Makes me wonder about today. Places like, I don't know, all the places in the Middle East that are being swept and wiped away. Now you got this big, huge conflict with Israel, and Israel's not going to stop. That's the thing. And I knew it October 7th when that took place, and they went in, and Netanyahu said never again. People weren't understanding what never again meant. He was going back to 1938 concentration camps and saying, I am never going to let my people ever again go through this. And I was shocked, kept it to myself as other people just thought it was going to be a quick war. I'm like, this is not going to be quick.
Yeah.
He is going to wipe out all of his enemies. So, yeah. Any other comments?
Several times throughout this chapter, like verse 12, 17, 21, it ends by saying, but his hand is stretched out still. Basically, that's saying, yeah, he's bad at them, but he still loves them. And he still wants the best for them. And when I was going through school, one of the ways they explained it is you're disappointed, you get disappointed with your kids, but that doesn't change that you don't love them.
True.
So many times, you'll hear a parent say, there's nothing you can do that I'll no longer love you. I might be disappointed in you, but I still love you. And even throughout this, them turning against his will, we still see, hey, but I still care about you. I still want you to do what you do.
Absolutely. I know as a dad, when I have to discipline my boys, the first thing I tell them is discipline is not something against you, it's something for you. So, and I always give them a hug and a kiss. Understand, I still love you, even though you did something bad, but you can't do that again. I'm trying to teach them that sometimes getting swatted on the hand, not literally, but symbolically, is just to wake you up to what you're doing wrong. So, I agree with you, Dan, that's a good point, thank you. Any other comments before we move on? Moving into chapter 10. Woe to those who make unjust laws, to those who issue oppressive decrees, to deprive the poor of their rights, and withhold justice from the oppressed of my people, making widows their prey, and robbing the fatherless. What will you do on the day of reckoning, when disaster comes from afar, to whom you will run for help? Where will you leave your riches? Nothing will remain but the cringe among the captives, for all among the slain. Yet for all this, his anger is not turned away, his hand still upraised. Oh, like Daniel just said. But there's something else that's going on here. You're talking about something that has happened throughout time, and especially right now. People are going to jump up and down and say everything that the government is doing is against the poor, it's against the migrants in this country, it's against everything else. And if that's the camp that you live within, then that's your truth. To deprive the poor of rights, okay? But at the same time, there's a point in time, just like God's doing, you have to clear a way to rebuild and to start new. And I think, unfortunately, we're in a situation like that now, where we are wiping away so we can start new. And if you look at the history of the United States, you start looking at the history of some of these federal agencies that we're wiping away. You want to take this as an example in chapter 10. All that's happening is we're just saying we need to relook at what we're doing. We need to do it better. Because when you get into it, you start analyzing who's getting what. I didn't vote on that. None of us did. So we start to say to ourselves, why are we allowing this to happen? So it's the same thing here in chapter 10. You have to be able to look back, take a 30,000-foot look, and say, am I providing any oppressive decrees? Am I depriving the poor of their rights? Am I upholding, or if I'm withholding justice to oppress my people? All this is something that I think, not as a politician, but as a leader, you have to constantly look at and wonder, how can I do what I'm doing better? And it's not always easy, because sometimes you have to go to somebody, tap them on the shoulder and say, listen, I don't think you're going to be a part of this anymore. You're what's holding us up. And it's an unfortunate thing, but using a 21st century look at it on something from 730 BC, it's kind of the exact same thing. So I'll stop there. Any comments on that? On what the 21st century perspective versus this 730 BC perspective is? It's kind of the same thing, but at the same time, there's two different trains of thought. There's definitely more than two different types of people in this world. There's multiple personalities, there's multiple people that have their own beliefs and attitudes about this stuff. So if you have something different to say, or if you would like to say something different, that would be a good time. Anybody has anything that they'd like to put out there? No? So moving on to verse 5. My subheading reads, God's judgment on Assyria. It says, woe to the Assyrian, the rod of my anger, in whose hand is the club of my wrath. I send him against a godless nation. I dispatch him against a people who anger me, to seize loot and snatch plunder, and to trample them down like mud in the streets. But this is not what he intends. This is not what he has in mind. His purpose is to destroy, to put an end to many nations. Are not my commanders all kings, he says? Has not Calno feared like Archmesh? Has not Hamath like Arpad? And Samaria like Damascus? As my hand sees the kingdoms of the idols, kingdoms whose images excel those of Jerusalem and Samaria. Shall I not deal with Jerusalem and her images as I dealt with Samaria and her idols? So stopping there, just as before we jump into some more meat and potatoes about Assyria. So as you can hear, what you're hearing God saying is that I'm setting you up for victory, to wipe away all of the stuff that I don't want. In Jerusalem, we have idols. It is not the way it is. There's one God, and it's me. And you're worshiping all these other idols and all these other gods. I'm getting rid of you. And I'm using Assyria to do this. God has done this before. I'm going to use a specific army to wipe out a nation. And then either that army, that force, either uprises or it falls. And most of the time, it falls over time. Because in the next section of read, it will tell you exactly why they fall. And it's exactly the same reason why we fall as human beings. The exact same reason that we do not proceed further with our walk in life with God. So, starting at that section, it says, when the Lord has finished all his work against Mount Zion and Jerusalem, he will say, I will punish the king of Assyria for the willful pride of his heart and the haughty looks in his eyes. For he says, by the strength of my hand I have done this, and by my wisdom, because I have understanding, I remove the boundaries of nations. I plunder their treasures. Like a mighty one, I subdued their kings, as one reaches into a nest. So my hand reaches for the wealth of all nations. As people gather abandoned eggs, so I gather all the countries. Not one flap a wing or open its mouth chirp. Does the axe raise itself above the person who swings it, or the saw boast against the one who uses it? So I'm going to stop there. So we've already read it. You guys understand? Everybody understands why Assyria will fall. We understand why, as it says here in the scripture. What is it that they're not doing?
Giving honor to the true God.
Giving honor to the true God. That's right. Just like all of us now, 21st century approach. When you get something great in life, you don't sit there and go, man, I am an awesome person. I can't believe I did that. You didn't. God did that for you. God provided that opportunity. God provided that pathway for you to succeed. And there's so many people, as I told Kingsley and I riding today, you have to stop and say, you know what, God, thank you for what you've given me. And I say thank you to God every day. I'm sure we all do. But you have to put thanks in the direction that it deserves. We can do absolutely nothing without God. And it's hard to listen to people who sit there, and as I call them, they're gold star members. Every time they do something great, they want to take a gold star sticker and stick it on themselves. I'm just the most awesome person in the world. I got gold stickers all over the place. And I know that because I had a friend. She used to keep all of her A papers from kindergarten to high school in a folder. And she used to go and look at them every once in a while. And I could not understand that. Like, do you need that much validation in your life? Are you that low in life that you have to be validated? Like, throw that away. You know, the only thing you need is to know that you've been baptized, which she was. Have you been baptized? Have you given yourself up? Yes. All the rest of this is worthless. Like in the book of Ecclesiastes, this is all worthless. Throw it all away. So, we have to give God honor constantly.
So many of these kings that, they would, when they, like this one here, it says, see what I did by my hand, Sometimes God's justice was swift, and sometimes it lasted a little longer. But, it took a little longer for things to happen the way God wanted it to. But I mean, they just didn't get it. And, you know, they had all the little idols and stuff that they worshiped, and they didn't think about a supreme God, you know, being
A single supreme God.
Pardon?
A single.
A single
One.
supreme, yeah, one single supreme
One
God.
single supreme
They
God.
had all the little idols that they thought helped them accomplish their, you know, their things. And then, of course, you look at one of the Herods in the New Testament. I can't remember which one it was, but where he was, you know, and the people started shouting the voice of a God and not of a man, and then and because he didn't correct them, immediately. Or it seemed like the way the Bible phrased it, it was pretty quick, consumed by worms and died. So,
Yeah.
you know, yeah, yeah. So I mean, you know, it's these people are in positions of such power, and I mean, and you look at Nebuchadnezzar, who he learned who the one true God was, because of course got to eat grass like an ox for a while. So, and they called these guys the kings of kings, the king of kings, you know, because they ruled over so many different nations.
Right.
But they wouldn't give God the glory that he deserved.
Well, I look at it this way. One, they never had somebody come and establish a religion and then die for that religion and then was resurrected. They didn't get to experience what we experienced as Christians. So everything that they had was, like you call it, a first-term knowledge. So when they did something great, they were like, man, am I the most awesome guy? Look at this. I have a harem. I have 70 wives, 300 concubines. I'm the most awesome person on the planet. And then, they didn't have a God to say, because they had, like you said, they had idols. Well, which one do I, God of earth, God of water, God of air, God of dirt, the tree God, my ocean God, which one should I think? Well, I never understood, so I'm going to think the ocean God. Something weird like that. It was, I listened to these stories, I watched documentaries about Old Testament life, and I always look for it, it's usually there. There's the idol. Incense, the main figurehead, all the secondary figureheads. Can you say no fault of their own? They already knew. I mean, if they were going to be going in that direction, if they were Jewish, even they would say there's only one, there's Adonai. That's the only God that there is. So I think it was more pride than anything else. Teresa?
And pride, yes. And one of the manifestations of that is it's a whole lot easier to have a made-up God that you can tell what to tell you than to subject yourself to someone else telling you what to do. And basically, humanity has proven it repeatedly over the centuries. We don't like being told what to do, and we keep finding ways to get rid of God so that we don't have to, do what we're told.
It's like in the TV show The Chosen, and you have Peter and you have the Roman soldier, and they're fixing the cistern, and he's talking to him and saying, hey, who do you pray for this? And he's like, oh, that's Poseidon. And who do you pray for this? Oh, that's Zeus. And I'm sitting there just not laughing, but I'm thinking to myself, this is really how people would think at the time. This polytheistic, you got to keep track of everything. And then on top of that, you have to keep track of where you're at culturally in what nation. Because if you're in Greece, you have one set of Roman gods, or you have a set of Greek gods that translate into Roman gods. And if you go to Egypt, those same Egyptian gods are the same Greek and Roman gods. It was the same three verticals. They were just in different names. You'd have to remember all that. So, wipe that away. I got God, Jesus Christ. Thank you. That's easy to remember. So, man, just so you know, if you just came in, we're into Isaiah chapter 10, right around verse 15.
Thank you. I didn't read my Bible today.
There should be one in the pew.
What's that?
There should be one in the pew,
There-
probably.
Is there a Bible? I know that there's one in my,
Yes, there
she
is.
can have.
Maybe that's kind of a roll.
Thank you.
You're welcome.
Isaiah What chapter?
Isaiah chapter 10, we're going to start writing about verse 15. We'll start at verse 15.
So these prophets back in those days in the nation of Israel were constantly trying to remind the leaders of God to recognize him as being part of what's going on, and that he put him in place. And you always wonder today, among nations in the world, how many of the leaders would acknowledge that, and how many, and what would they do if someone tried to reveal that to them?
Yeah, it always bothers me when somebody goes to any religious or holy site. It's always just picked apart. It's always it's just not done from the heart. It's politicizing something. It's really so. But it's okay, because those are the people who will one day have to stand in front of God and to answer for what they did. It's the one thing that I always take with me. You can hate me, you can love me, you can do whatever you want, you can say lies about me, you can speak untruths. But one day, you're going to stand in front of God and you're going to answer for it. And same thing with political figures and people in the media and people across the world. They're going to have to do the exact same thing. Doesn't matter who you are, we're all going to have to do that. So,
Going back,
the pillow that I got.
going back to what you were saying about the Roman gods and the Greek gods, that's what makes it so perfect, that Paul says, I saw a graven image to the unknown God. That's the God I want to tell you about. And what I always thought, like, what a perfect lead-in. Like, I want to tell you about the one you don't know about.
Right? Yeah. Any other comments before I move on? So starting, I'm going to go back to 15. It says, does the axe raise itself above the person who swings it, or the saw boast against the one who uses it? As if a rod were to wield the person who lifts it up, or a club brandish the one who is not wood. Therefore the Lord Almighty, will send a wasting disease upon his sturdy warriors. Under his pomp and fire will be kindled, like a blazing flame. The light of Israel will become a fire, their Holy One a flame. In a single day it will burn and consume his thorns and his briars. The splendor of his forests and fertile fields it will completely destroy, as when a sick person wastes away. And the remaining trees of his forest will be so few that a child could write them down. So just kind of moving into a new section in the Bible here, but just kind of a follow-up. That's really what's going on here, is that God is just showing us through Isaiah comparison of the two events that are taking place. So, any comments on that before I move on? My subheading reads, still in chapter 10, starting in verse 20, it says, the remnant of Israel. So the day the remnant of Israel, the survivors of Jacob, will no longer rely on him who struck them down, but will truly rely on the Lord. The Holy One of Israel, a remnant will remain, a remnant of Jacob who return to the mighty God. Now, let's not forget, there's a portion that have been pushed to the side. They still believe in the Lord. They still do as the Lord says. They still do as the Lord commands. The Lord has not touched them. This is the remnant of Jacob that's been pushed to the side. Lord, your people be like the sand by the sea. Israel, only a remnant will return. Destruction has been decreed. Overwhelming and righteous, the Lord Almighty, will carry out the destruction decreed upon the whole land. Therefore, this is what the Lord Almighty says. My people who live in Zion, do not be afraid of the Assyrians, who beat you with a rod and lift up a club against you, as Egypt did. Very soon my anger against you will end, and my wrath will be directed to their destruction. The Lord Almighty will lash him up with a whip, and when he struck down Midian at the rock of Oreb, and he will raise his staff over the waters, as he did in Egypt. In that day, their burden will be lifted from your shoulders, their yoke from your neck. The yoke will be broken because you will have grown so fat. So, stopping there, as you're seeing what God's giving a decree, he's giving a promise to the remaining nation of Israel. I will take care of you, and I will destroy Assyria. Why? Because they didn't give me the credit that I deserved when I first went in and gave them the power to destroy Israel. Did God know that? It's not the question. I'm not talking about predestination or anything like that. But God gave Assyria the power to be able to do this for him, take care of Jerusalem, Judah. When there was no acknowledgement of God's presence, God said, I am now going to destroy you. You have to remember, our timeline is not God's timeline. If you remember back in, I forgot what chapter it is, God was going to do something, told somebody, yeah, it'll happen in 65 years. It's like an entire lifetime. I have to wait an entire lifetime, 65 years. But to God, 65 years is 1 second. It doesn't matter. Time does not control, or nor is part of God's existence. So this is good. God just stating more of what he is going to do for the tribe of Jacob and what's left over versus everybody else that's still in Judah. Do you have something, Rev?
I'm just thinking, you were talking about the timeline. I mean, look how long it took for Jesus to come to the earth. I mean, from the time of, approximately, from the time of Adam and Eve until the Lord came, what, 6,000 to 8,000 years.
Right. The time of creation. I mean,
But, yeah, I mean, or what's that? 4,000 years, But still, thousands of years is nothing to God. So,
1,000
like
years
you
is a
said.
day, and a day is 1,000 years.
yeah.
As it says in the Bible. Which is not an actual equation. People think that's an equation. It's just it's a paradox. God created time for us, so he did not create it for himself.
God allows things to happen in his good time,
That's right. So
not ours.
maybe one day I'll be in front of God and God will say, we're going to take care of this tomorrow. That could be 1 billion years. I don't know. God, I couldn't even understand if God was to say to me tomorrow or in 5 minutes. I couldn't even understand that. I think that's more human than it is heavenly. So.
And I mean, even some of the events that we're reading about that Isaiah, some of them happened within 100 years. Some of them happened a couple hundred years. So.
Right. Which, to the distraught of humans, they thought, oh, I'm out of it. I'm clear, I'm free. Nothing's going to happen to me because God's never done anything. Well, when it took place 200 years ago. And then it happens. And you're like, wait, God waited 200 years to do this to me? There had to have been a thought. But you have to understand again, time is a paradox. It's not attached to God. It could have been at that moment God did it, or however God illustrates it, puts it forward. But I've never really thought about that when it comes to the Bible, because you can't apply a human quality and characteristic to our deity. It doesn't work that way. Okay. Starting in verse 28, we'll try to finish chapter 10 here. They entered Aiath, they passed through Migron, they store supplies at Michmash, they go over the pass and say, we will camp overnight at Jebah. Ramah trembles, Jabesh and Saul flees. Cry out, God rebel. Listen, Lishach. Poor, and these are some words, Anathoth. Naneth is in flight. The people of Gibeon take cover. This day they will halt at Nob. They will shake their fist at the mountain of daughter Zion, at the hill of Jerusalem. See, the Lord Almighty, will top off the boughs with great power. The lofty trees will be felled, the tall ones will be brought low. He will cut down the forest thickets with an axe. Lebanon will fall before the mighty one. So, this is more of a foreshadowing, while at the same time cleaning up everything else that has happened and what is the next step in this process. Now, I'm sure I have a lot of places to go to look, but it seems like they always go back to the same places. It's Jeremiah, it's 1 Samuel, and other parts of Isaiah where this exact same statement and promise has been made. So it's kind of God's way of wrapping this up in this chapter, for lack of a better term. But it's just more of us to see that God was serious about what he was going to do. He was naming out where he was going to do it. He was naming out the people that were going to be involved and where this was going to take place. Now, even though that this, we're talking about two different timelines, we're talking about when it was written versus when it actually happened. But this is just more for us to know that, for me, my belief, by naming out everybody in every place that this is going to happen in, it was just fortifying and reinforcing us that this actually did happen. And it happened here, 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 and these are the people that were involved. So there was no ambiguity in the statement at all. God was being very direct in who he was going to use and where it was going to take place. So that's kind of how I read that last part. Does anybody have a different interpretation that they wanted to share? Because that's kind of where I'm at with it.
I don't have a different interpretation, but I do have kind of an interesting fact.
Okay?
As we read down, as we were reading from verse 28 down through 29 there, we always make the comment that God's word is living and alive, and of course the Bible is true. So it talks about there, he has come to Ai, he has passed through Migron at Mishmash, he stores his baggage, they have crossed over the pass. Just so happened that, I believe it was World War I. The Allied forces were trying to figure out how to get around to the enemy, and they were near this area, and I guess one of the soldiers was reading his Bible and recognized the place of Mishmash, and that there was a pass. And so they started looking, he told his commanders, and they started looking for it, and they found this pass, which allowed them to get to the enemy and take them out or circle them or whatever. But just kind of an interesting fact that, you know, God's word is always true
And solid.
and solid. Yeah. And it's solid enough that it worked to help in their endeavor to help defeat the enemy at the time.
Yeah.
So, kind of interesting.
Just as a joke, my wife was running out the door the other day, and it was morning time. I said, "Are you running off to get your morning drink?" Which we read it in the book of Isaiah. She said, "Yeah, I gotta get my drink. I gotta go with you." Okay. And I'm just thinking as she left, and I'm just thinking about it. That this is something she's never been taught. It's funny to me because I was never taught it, but going forward with that thought, is how many things are in the Bible that are in a 21st century perspective that God wrote back thousands of years ago that still apply to us to this day. And how I try, whenever I'm talking with like Corbin, if we're having a Bible study, or my wife or my boys, it's a very interesting light bulb. It goes off and they read this and they're like, "Oh, well that applies to what I just did yesterday." And how all of this takes place, not today, not tomorrow, but forever. That God was so knowledgeable, unbelievable, this great deity that he could write out a book that applied 4,000 years ago, that applied today, that applied 700,000 years ago. It doesn't matter. It all applies. God knew that that's what he was doing. He's writing a book where you can't read it and say, "Well, that only applies 6,000 years, 4,000. No, it applies today as well. Because the same problem takes place today. And how are you going to fix it? How are you gonna find your path to the enemy? To the Bible. It's really interesting. We'll
Thanks,
start
Chris.
in, we'll start in chapter 11 next week. Thank you, everybody, for coming today. I appreciate it.